The New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society presents this recording from January 21st, 2026. Host Stephanie Cowell is in conversation with novelist Leslie Carroll and Jeanne Mackin and Polish translator Sean Gasper Bye. These multi-translated novelist and translator discuss the vagaries of translation for foreign markets, how a translator works, how and where translations are sold, advances in royalties, capturing and respecting author styles, joys and problems of translation, and title and cover changes. Information about our chapter is available at our website. Links to our presenters are listed in the description. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Let me first introduce you to our host, the lovely Stephanie Cowell. Now, Stephanie has been an opera singer, a balladeer, a founder of Strawberry Opera, and other arts venues. She is the author of my favorite historical fiction. In fact, I read her before I met her, and I've loved both of this. Nicholas Cook, The Physician of London, The Players, a novel of the young Shakespeare, Marrying Mozart, Claude and Camille, a novel of Monet, The Boy in the Rain, and her latest novel that is tearing up the charts, The Man in the Stone Cottage, a novel of the Bronte sisters. Her work has been translated into several languages, and Stephanie is the recipient of an American Book Award. You can learn more about her at her website, which I'm posting in the chat. And now, Stephanie, please, won't you take it away?
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for coming. I'm glad we're doing this panel on translations because, my goodness, being translated has been an extraordinary experience, and I'm sure we all have stories to tell about when we saw our first translations. So, how does work get translated by a foreign publisher? And now, of course, that we don't need to have an in-person world, particularly, we have a lot of stuff through emails, through phone calls, various digital things. But the major venue for selling book rights for 500 years has been the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany. And that was actually started a few decades after Gutenberg had his movable type and invented his printing press. It actually had been a site for medieval manuscripts, which of course were hand copied as early as the 12th century. So you were really standing on the grounds of history when you go to that book fair. And today it's got visitors and thousands of exhibitors and editors and agents and scouts and authors and industry professionals, and they all apparently jam the halls there. I've never been there, but I hear it's quite extraordinary. And there are a couple of other book fairs. There's one in London, which is a big one, London Book Fair, and then in Bologna, if you are a children's author, that is for you. And so the business of selling books to be translated is a year-round market, and we're going to explore, starting with that, we're going to explore the experiences of two authors and a little bit of me, and one very adept translator in how your book gets to be from a manuscript in English, and all of a sudden it's in German or Polish or Japanese or something totally unreadable for most of us on the page. So I would like to have my two novelists introduce themselves. And so, Leslie, would you tell us at first something about, I've got all my notes here, something about yourself and your books published, and how many books have you been translated into? And something.
Hi, I'm Leslie Carroll. I am a native New Yorker, and I started out as an actress, and I got into what, my fourth decade, I guess, was when I first got published. I started out in contemporary women's fiction, and then moved into historical fiction and then historical nonfiction about the loves and lives of European royalty. And I made myself crib notes so that I would get this number correct. But I've had about 22, 23 books published. Interestingly, the nonfiction has had two translations. There were seven nonfiction titles, two translations into Polish, seven contemporary novels, all translated into Italian, And then all of the rest of the novels, 7 or 8 historical fiction, which has been the most popular in terms of foreign translations. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because those stories tend to be evergreen and about people that were European, so no surprise of European translations. And those have been translated into 10 languages and mostly Middle European, because a lot of those books, I wrote a trilogy on Marie Antoinette, so a lot of the languages that the Marie Antoinette historical trilogy was translated into used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Fascinating. You happen did you hold a book up? If you did, I missed it. Did you hold one of your books up?
Okay.
Please
So
do.
this is, wait a second, I didn't
You could
hold
try
up.
to hold up all of them.
I know
but
this is the first title is Becoming Marie Antoinette, and the middle book is Days of Splendor, Days of Sorrow. The first book covers her days in the Austrian court as a young Austrian archduchess, and it goes through her marriage to the Dauphin until they become King and Queen of France, and then the middle book, Days of Splendor, Days of Sorrow, covers her years of as queen until the storming of the Bastille. And then the final novel, Confessions of Marie Antoinette, covers, it opens with the March of the Poissardes, the Paris fishwives, in October 6th, 5th, and 6th, 1789, and it goes through the death of Marie Antoinette on October 16th, 1793.
So I have some more questions for you, but if we could.
Sure. Oh, and this is the Polish version.
Oh, that's the Polish version.
That's the Polish translation of Becoming Marie Antoinette.
So
Actually,
I
no,
want to ask you some more questions, but let's go to Jeanne first and hear about what books she's written and what her translations are. Jeanne.
Good evening. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I've published 10 novels,
Wow.
and the last 3 have been set in Europe between World War I and World War II. Time that really, really fascinates me. The most recent one is Picasso's Lovers. I set myself the challenge of trying to redeem Picasso's reputation.
Oh.
I don't know if I succeeded or not, but I sure got to know his work really well, and I have great respect for him as an artist, and I think as a man he got, he was of his time and no better, no worse than many other people. But the Picasso's Lovers gave me a chance to really think about his work, which was fun for me because I'm more of a medieval person. Give me a Francesca anytime. I kind of don't know what to say as far as translation goes. The first books I had that were actually translated into Japanese, and it was 3 murder mysteries I wrote under a different name. And I remember a friend of mine asked me, "How will you know if it's a good translation or not?" And I said, "I won't." I'm at the mercy of the translator.
Totally.
But it was fun to see the books come out in Japanese, beautiful, beautiful little editions. And Picasso's Lovers has now, I think, been translated into 5 languages. I kind of don't keep count.
Oh, it's wonderful.
But I know there's a Russian translation, Lithuanian, Finnish, Spanish, Italian, can't remember. But what fascinates me is that the publisher must have done a really good cover because all of the translations, except for one, have used the same cover as the American cover with changing just a few minor details.
Wow, I've never had that experience.
I know it's kind of strange, but yeah, okay, I guess people like the cover. The exception was the Spanish one. And let's see if I can find it. And I love the Spanish one. They gave it a real Picasso feeling to it.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's
Isn't
great.
it fabulous?
Oh, I do like that. Yeah, I think some of my covers are wonderful, my foreign covers.
Yeah.
Can you and Leslie, maybe Leslie can go first, tell me like Leslie, you started to tell me. First of all, tell me if you ever met one of your translators who've had any relationship with them, or was it entirely a distance thing? Leslie, you mentioned that before.
I have never met any of my translators or editors. The way that this has always worked, I have always been published by the major houses. It's Penguin or Random House or Penguin Random House after they merged, or HarperCollins. So I never find out that any of my books have sold for foreign rights until after it's been published. Sometimes after it's been published or after the contract has been signed. What happens is that my agent, Irene Goodman, works with a subrights agent, Baror International, and the Barors go to the Frankfurt Book Fair and they peddle my books to whatever foreign markets are interested in selling them. And then the contracts are signed between the Barors and the foreign publishers and Irene, or actually between the Barors and the foreign publishers. And then the foreign publishers are the people who hire the translators in the respective countries. I will see a copy of the contract when I see a check that comes through Irene for the net for the signing. So what happens is I get, and I call it free money, and maybe it'll pay a month of my mortgage. This is not a way to get rich. It's a way to kind of say, oh, isn't it interesting that my books are going to be read by people somewhere in Europe or Asia or South America.
It's quite fascinating. I mean, the late Christopher Gortner, a colleague of ours, I was in the Uffizi in Florence, and I went to the bookshop, and there were Christopher Gortner's books in Italian, and it just felt like it was just so marvelous to.
I was in Versailles writing something for this company that was a startup called Bardium. And I was writing tours of Versailles, and I found my books in the bookshop in Versailles. Not translated into French, in English. And I went, English. I'm the author of this book. Can I do a book signing? And I spoke to the head of the bookshop, and they said to me, how's Saturday? You can't make that happen in New York City.
No, you cannot make that happen in New York City, but they knew they had to grab you. That is amazing. So, Jeanne, do you have any particular relationship with, have you met any of your translators? Have you met your foreign agents? Have you had any personal experience?
No, it's all been done through electronic correspondence. I haven't met any of them. I spoke with a woman who was doing the Spanish translation, but she left the company soon after and ended up not doing it. But my agreement, and I think most authors do this, is that when a work is being translated, they are absolutely free to contact me with any questions they might have, or, to check with anything that they have questions about themselves. I know the Polish translation of Picasso's Lovers, the publishing company came to me and said, we can't translate the title as is because the word lovers in Polish has a transactional connotation. So they had to title it Picasso's.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought it's just the opposite, because they titled it Picasso's Woman, which in English has a transactional connotation. But I said, yeah, sure. Well, you know the nuance of the language better than I do, so we'll go with Picasso's Woman. But usually, I'm not in touch with the translators, and I respect their right to just do the work and not be bothered by the author.
I'm sure Sean, our translator, is happy to hear that. So can can both of you just tell me? I'm sorry, Sean. Do you want to speak to that?
Oh no, I had noticed the thing with the title and was wondering about it myself. So it's really interesting to hear that they spoke to you about it. That's cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. It was fun to hear.
So I was going to ask if you both of our writers, if you could recall. I'm sure you've had readers contact you, and maybe you've even met some of them. Can you tell me one experience you've had meeting or being contacted by writing by a reader?
I
And
get emails all the time from readers,
oh,
and
marvelous.
I'm amazed. But the most interesting contact that I had with a reader was New Year's Eve. It was New Year's Eve 2016, and my husband and I did. He hates the phrase bucket list, but this was a bucket list thing. We went to the Sylvester Ball, which no longer exists, but the Sylvester Ball at the Hofburg. And so we were in Vienna, and because this was a dream of mine to dance in the rooms where little Marie Antoinette danced, and her mother, of course, Maria Theresa, Empress of Austria, where the family danced and everything. This was going to be amazing. I was going to go to a Viennese ball on New Year's Eve, and it was
Oh,
fabulous.
marvelous.
So my husband is in black tie. He's in his wedding tuxedo. And I'm in this big black ball gown because they actually have a dress code. And you're at assigned seats at this table, and we're going around the table, and also at the table was a lovely family from Rome. And she had been a flight attendant and a model and a number of other professions, very elegant. I forgot what her husband did. They had their 16-year-old daughter with her. They were very, very well traveled. And my husband always tells everybody, "Oh, my wife is an author." And I'm like, "Honey, please." It's just like they're not gonna know. Don't boast. And so she said to me, "Well, what's your name? Would I know anything?" And I took out a business card, and I told her what my name was. And she said, "Oh my God, I've read all your books." And I
Isn't that
went,
wonderful? Isn't that
"No, no, no,
wonderful?
no, you're just saying that." And then she mentioned, and this was the one that she mentioned, which was the Italian version of Playdates,
Oh, how
which
great.
which they published in 2 editions. And I just could not believe that here I was sitting at this magical New Year's Eve ball in Vienna with this woman that knew who I was and had read my books. And I do not know, it's clearly not play dates, which is, again, we're talking about colloquial phrasing, and a
Yeah,
play date to us is,
that is amazing. That is really,
and
really.
I don't know, Stephanie, do you speak Italian? It's matrimoni, bugi e appuntamenti.
I
And
speak
I don't know what
Italian.
it means. Obviously,
Well,
matrimony
the
is
wedding,
marriage, but
I can't because mine is also matrimonial in the one I have here.
yeah.
Yeah. So that means wedding. I speak some Italian. I'm really not a great linguist, but I speak some.
But
Uh,
it has a much longer title, and I don't know. And
where
in
if you
her
type it
thought
to me,
bubble, the
I
mother
can
is
tell
saying
you what
it's
it
not
is.
all fun and games. And the thought bubble in Italian is il sesso per una madre single, un miraggio. A something for a single mother, a miracle, but no,
America,
that would be miracle,
America.
or unless that's, but
Um,
anyway, but yeah.
so I could just before I'm going to ask uh, Jeannie this question, but I'd like to share myself that two or three totally wonderful things have happened. Many wonderful things, but I got to meet my German agent who works out of Zurich in Switzerland, and we had corresponded a bit. And for my first books, and when I came to Zurich, he gave me a tour, and me and my husband a tour of the historic part of Zurich, which was amazing. What a lovely, lovely man. He still has that agency. And goodness. And then some lovely young Italian woman wrote me who was in Verona. And I just happened to be taking a trip to Italy. And I happened to be going to Verona. So we had lunch together. And I spoke bad Italian for 2 hours, and she was very kind and fond at the table laughing. And she was just lovely. She's now a Facebook friend. It's just really kind of amazing when people read your books and they write to you. So, Jeannie, do you have any stories about meeting anyone or a person who's writing to you or
Yeah,
something?
sure. Yeah, when the Italian version of the book before this, the last collection came out, um, my husband was showing in Italy at the time. He was an artist, and we had a lot of fun, a lot of conversations about that, but the book in Italian. But the very first novel I ever published, The French Woman, when that came out and was translated, it was just fun, and to go into Trinity College in Dublin and be able to see, your book listed in their contents, because that's the equivalent of the Library of Congress, was great.
Oh, marvelous. Well, how absolutely wonderful.
Yeah,
It,
yeah, that
it's
was
an,
fun.
it's amazing. I mean, I think translations are really a real example of how books, you write them in the privacy of your heart, you edit them, you struggle, you fight for them, and then they travel on like grown-up children, and they don't write home. I mean, they just travel on. You don't even know right now who in what language is reading your book. It's just it's this wonder. To me, it happens in my native language, in English, but also in the translations. Where are they now? On whose night table are they? What do you mean they're in the bookshop in Japan? How did they get there?
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it?
I do. I'm awful. I sometimes late at night, I start looking about where my books are in the world, what bookshops they're in, all sorts of nonsense like that, which guilty pleasures of.
Yeah, I have a friend who travels a lot in Europe, and she always photographs the bookshops with my books in them. So
Oh my
it's just,
gosh.
yeah, I know. It's
It's so wonderful. I had a friend who went to Salzburg, which was, of course, where Mozart was born, and this novel is about Mozart, and it was translated in German. And there's a bookshop in Salzburg, which is the oldest bookshop, second oldest bookshop in Austria, and it was a place where Mozart's father would buy his books 200, 300 years ago. And there was my book in translation in the center of the window. And she forgot to take a picture. But
oh no.
I know, but she told me about it. And it just, my heart just, because it was like it was like 2 or 3 streets away from where he was born. So it's just, I was like,
Yeah.
went into one of my crazy things. I think that we have pretty much covered everything in my first section. So I'd like, if possible, to turn to Sean, our bona fide translator, and ask him some questions about his work, which really kind of amazes me. So, Sean, how did you become a translator? How did you begin?
I like many translators, I sort of fell into it. I translate from Polish into English. I have Polish family background, which is what got me interested in the language. I studied it in college, and basically, I had a career plan, which was to go work for the State Department or to do kind of international development or something like this. That didn't work out, and I spent some time. After grad school, hunting around for other things to do, and started doing volunteer translation. Um, and just really loved it and kind of kept looking for little bits of translation to do here and there. And I was finally taken under the wing of Antonio Lloyd-Jones, who's a very well-known Polish literary translator. And she sort of mentored me over the first couple of years of my career. And one thing just sort of led to another. And I've now been translating Polish literature for 13 years, I think.
Wow.
It's been the main thing that I have done for the last 5 or 6 years. I was even a full-time literary translator at one point. Now I work for an organization called the American Literary Translators Association, which supports literary translators, but I also do my own translation work. I've translated about a dozen books. The one that I'm plugging tonight is The King of Warsaw by Szczepan Twardoch, which is a historical novel appropriately set in Warsaw in 1937. And it is the semi-true story of a group of Jewish gangsters in Warsaw in the final years before the start of the Second World War. It's full of sex and violence and drama and swearing and period slang. Leslie and I were talking about slang earlier before everyone signed on. It was a really, really fun, really interesting book to translate. But I do a lot of historical nonfiction as well. So history is always very kind of close to my translation practice.
Well, that's fantastic. So that's how you began. And do writers and editors do they approach you or do you approach them?
So this dynamic is different in different languages. If editors in so again, I only work into English. So I'm talking about, Anglophone editors here. For languages like Spanish or French or sometimes German that editors can sometimes read on their own, or where they have really strong relationships with publishers in those respective countries, they will sometimes buy a book and then kind of go out looking for a translator. For a language like Polish, they rely on translators to find out about which books are interesting. And so we translators end up acting as de facto agents for our authors and for our books. So in fact, for this same author right now, I'm in the midst of preparing a pitching package and a sample translation for his latest book that I'm going to be taking around to some American publishers and some UK publishers and trying to get them interested.
Oh, I didn't know that. Did you mean that the writer hired you to translate?
Oh, if only I were getting paid to do this. No. This is
This is
just
earn money. I know writers don't earn much. I thought maybe
yeah, it really depends. I have occasionally had an editor approach me about doing a book. The next book that I have coming out is one that is historical nonfiction that I was approached by an editor about, but that's really uncommon. It's much more common that I will hear about the book from my editor or writer contacts in Poland. They very often will approach me, ask me to do samples, ask me to do promotional material, this kind of thing. But I'm sort of the one with the contacts on this side of the Atlantic, as it were. And so they really rely on me to be able to help them get the books into English. I think that's quite different from going out of English. I think it's less common. I don't know, and it's going to be different in every country, but I think, what our two authors were describing of having a sub-agent, of having them go to the book fairs and kind of sort this out for them is maybe more common going out of English. But going into English, we publish so few books in translation in our market that we sort of rely on these kind of like ad hoc structures, and a lot of people doing, unfortunately, spec work, as it were. It's the work that we have to do to make sure that we get the job further down the line.
Wow, I've never really talked to a translator. I've had very little contact with any of my translators. Actually, it was my Polish translator who contacted me about my Mozart novel, because at one point I said there was a jar of mustard on the table, and she wrote me and she said, "What kind of mustard?" I said, "What kind of mustard?"
That's a very Polish question. They have lots of different types of mustard in Poland, and they're very specific.
You wanted to know what kind of mustard? Well, I said, I had a lot of research into Mozart to write that novel, a great deal, but never in my life did I research what kind of mustard he liked best.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that your translator. I'm glad to hear your translator was in touch with you. It made me sad to hear Leslie and Jeanne saying that they have really rarely been in touch with their translators.
It's only in the beginning. Yeah, only in the first books. Yeah.
If my authors are living, which they usually are, I always try to be in contact with them, and I usually send them sort of towards the end of the project a great big long list of questions of things that I haven't quite been able to decipher, or things that need clarifying. I find an author's input really indispensable, and I've always had really good, strong relationships with my authors. I've been able to become friends with some of them. I go visit them when I go to Poland. It's been a wonderful experience.
Goodness.
It would thrill me if a translator were confused about the history of something and wanted my help or input, but it's absolutely never been asked for, either through the Barors or through Irene or anybody.
I have a theory that agents and editors try to be very protective of their author's time, and they don't want you getting bombarded with questions from all of these people from all over the world. And I think they think it's probably some enormous burden to have to deal with these translators everywhere. But I think it can be a really positive thing for an author and translator to be in touch with one another. And I think if your editors and your agents and sub-agents are open to it, I would encourage them to let your translators know that they can be in touch.
I'd rather have that than a terrible mistake that went to print in a foreign language that created an error of fact.
That's right.
I narrate audiobooks, and I've done a lot of my own books, and I've done other people's books. And when something came up in a historical novel that a colleague wrote, I refused to narrate a mistake when the head of the audio studio said, no, 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 we want you to do it this way. And I said, the colleague and I share an agent. Can I please contact my agent and ask if we can get in touch with the author? Because I don't think she's going to want me to narrate something that isn't right, because maybe there was a
Yeah,
typo in the book or
that's right.
something like
Yeah.
that. I'm like, I'm not going to read it verbatim if there's a mistake.
Yeah, yeah.
Can we
You know,
fix
that's
this?
it's so interesting to hear you tell that story because I have had experiences like that with translation as well. There's sort of a cliche that translators are the closest readers a book ever gets. And there have been times when I've caught maybe an inconsistency in a manuscript and gone back to the author and said, hey, it sort of says this over here and this over here at the opposite end of the book. I'm not sure how these link up. And the author says, oh gosh, I had meant to fix that. And then um, or you know, I especially when I work with a non-living author, actually, there's an enormous amount of research and fact checking that I have to do. I do that not because I'm skeptical of this author's skills. I do it because to me it's part of my due diligence as a translator. It's me making sure that I understand exactly correctly what I'm reading in the original text. I always say that that's the fundamental task of the translator is you have to understand the original text. If you don't do that, then you can't do anything, you know. And so that means if there's technical language, if there's historical references, you know, in The King of Warsaw, Stepan is very interested in like military history and in, you know, types of equipment, types of guns, and he'll always give you, you know, very detailed descriptions of these things with their names, what their background is, where they were built, how they operate. There's a sequence in this book where a character fires a pistol and he describes in slow motion each piece of the pistol
Wow.
moving as it fires. And I had to go on YouTube and find videos of people dismantling. He mentioned the
Wow.
make and model of pistol, and so I could look that up. And I found these videos of people taking them apart and saying, this is this part, this is this part, this is how it works. You know, I love doing this. It's a lot of fun. I mean, speaking of things we don't get paid to do, but
I know,
to
I
me, it's
know.
like it's an essential part of the work of a translator, and it's one of the joys of this work. But I think that's you know, when lay people think of translation, I think, you know, they sometimes think translators are sort of walking dictionaries and you're just sort of
Yeah.
taking this word and putting it over into this other word. And there's all these other layers of the work that we do. And that research is just one illustration
You're
of
also
that.
And that's true
responsible
for
for
writing
capturing
historical
the
fiction.
author's
Yeah.
voice. You're
That
responsible for
Yeah.
capturing the author's ethos and bringing that in. I think
that's absolutely
as
right.
readers, when we enjoy a novel in translation, it's because we think we are reading that original author, and it's because we're reading an incredibly brilliant job by the translator.
But yeah, that's absolutely right. I come from an amateur dramatics background. I did a lot of amateur theater from when I was a little kid all the way through to grad school. And one of the things I love about being a translator is that it's like writing in character. You know, you have to think really hard about the author's voice, about the different characters' voices, about the I always think it's about the experience that the reader has reading the original. What are the emotions that come up? What are the associations that come up? How does it feel? What are all those intangible things? The texture, the rhythm, all of these things that go into the voice. And then, you know, I'm usually juggling a couple of different projects at once, and I sort of bounce between, oh, now I'm writing in this voice, and now I'm writing in this voice, and now I'm writing in this voice, and it's fun. It's really enjoyable. One of the advantages also of translating into English is that most of my authors know English to one extent or another. And so I can, if I need to, I can have them take a look at something and say, hey, am I getting this right? Does this feel like you? And it's always really gratifying to have an author come back to you and say, yes, you know, you've caught the voice, you've captured that rhythm, you've got the feel. Yeah.
That's amazing. I just wanted to just tell one little story before we go on to the last question. You've covered a lot of stuff in my section. I want to talk about the three sections that we sent you, and a few words about how you felt about it. Sections that he has looked at our Polish translations and is going to talk about how they relate to the English. I just wanted to say that I had many good pieces of good fortune in my life with translations, but my very young stepmother, speaks fluent English, German, Italian, and French. So she was able to read my translations in those languages. And she said what the translator did with my Mozart novel, which of course I couldn't know or do, not being a German speaker. I know some German, but I'm not a German speaker. Is that he when Mozart went to various Salzburg to Vienna, said that the dialect is slightly different, and he used the dialect in his German translation, which I never would have known to do, which I think is, of course, probably a German reader would know that, but I thought that was a marvelous little addition. Anyway, so if we could just talk for a few minutes before we open up to the audience about the translations we three sent you, Sean, and what you have to say about them.
Yeah, this was really fun. So Stephanie and Leslie and Jeannie each sent me just the first paragraph or so from one of their books and the corresponding Polish translation, and asked me to look over them. I go the other direction, so it was really, really fun to get into the head of someone working from English into Polish and to read these English texts and think, oh, what would be the things that I'm noticing in these texts, and like how could I deal with them in Polish? There are so many stereotypes in English about translators, being unfaithful or changing things around. There was that whole TV show about the author whose translator rewrites his very serious books as romance novels, and they become like runaway hits in Mexico. So I think that authors are always sort of suspicious of like what is happening in this mysterious language with all of the consonants, is Polish. But I do want to say that I was really impressed with these three translations. It was interesting to see the three of your writing, put side by side and get a feel for your different prose styles. And what I saw was your translators really feeling that and really responding to that. Stephanie, your book, Claude and Camille, was translated by Anna Rojkowska, and you open with this beautiful poetic image of copper pots hanging in a kitchen with the afternoon light glittering on them. And Anna's opening sentence does this wonderful thing with alliteration, where she says, blade światło późnego popołudnia odbijało się w miedzianych garnkach. This that really makes the image pop in this lovely way.
So beautiful.
And Leslie, the thing that I felt from your text was that I could see you really dipping into you write in a modern language, but I could see you dipping into bits of archaism or bits of like very literary language. You were using words like betokens, which I love. That's such a great word. And provisioned. Your opening scene is the crowds watching them build the scaffold that I think that Marie Antoinette is going to be executed
No,
on.
It was the woman. It's the woman that was the con artist with the necklace, the famous diamond necklace. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Oh, but I could see the translator.
Jeanne de la Motte Valois.
Yeah, I could see the translator picking up on that, and it's interesting. It's a good example of where a technique translators sometimes use, where if an author is making a stylistic choice and you can't repeat it, you can't replicate it in that specific place, but you can do it somewhere else to give the overall paragraph the same feel. Then that's what you do. And I could see her doing that, looking for opportunities to use little bits of sort of unusual language or a little bit archaic language or a little bit, elevated literary language. And it was just really effective. I thought it was a really excellent translation. And your translator was Beata Długajczyk. And then Jeannie, your book was translated by Anna Bereta Jankowska. And the thing that I noticed is that of all of the three of you, your prose style to me was the most kind of stripped back. And it reminded me of a friend of mine talks about writing like this as reminding her of modern art. And I thought, oh, there's this parallel between your prose style and Picasso's painting, where it's these seemingly very plain short sentences. But I can say as a translator, this is actually the hardest type of sentence to translate because the balance has to be just exactly right. The rhythm has to just fit. You have no room to move anything around. And it has to look effortless when it's, of course, very effortful and difficult, as I'm sure you know from writing it yourself. The thing that I noticed here is your opening scene is of Picasso's birth, and he was very nearly stillborn, and this sort of blue and white wax statuette of a newborn, you say, comes out of his mother, and his uncle sort of curiously peers in to look at him and accidentally burns him with the end of his cigar, and Picasso lets out this wail, and your narrator closes the scene by saying, I assure you, he decided to live. Fire brought him to life. Fire keeps him alive. And those last two sentences are an illustration of just what I was talking about. Seemingly very simple, but with this poetic repetition, with a real punch to them that add a real kind of bracket onto the end of the scene. And your translator did a wonderful thing with Fire Keeps Him Alive, where in Polish, you can move words around into almost any order you like in the sentence. There's endings on the words that tell you what they're doing, whether they're the subject, the direct object, the indirect object, what have you. So you can put them in any order you want and it will still be understandable. And she took that sentence, Fire Keeps Him Alive, and she inverted the word order and changed the meaning very slightly. So her sentence is Ogień życia jego podsyca. And so instead of keeps him alive, she used a word that means to feed or to fuel. And she put it at the end of the sentence, which is the place of emphasis in Polish. And so I could see that she was saying, okay, we have these two like very punchy sentences and this very bold image at the end. What can I do to make sure that this sentence will really land? And she used a poetic device to make sure that it did it. I thought it was really effective. I saw that. I thought, oh, wow, that's a strong, even though it
That's
changes.
so great to know.
This is
Thank you. Yeah.
so fascinating. You know, and I think that we maybe this is so wonderful. We ought to possibly, Susan, do we have questions in the chat if we continue?
We certainly do.
We do. Okay, so Sean, I wish you could come over and I give you wine and we'll 2 hours. And
I can talk about this all night.
Oh my God! I never realized that. It's fascinating. Anyway, Susan, I think it's time to turn to the chat, so people can ask questions. Q&A.
Sure. We'll start off. We have a question from Kim. Kim wanted to know, Sean, is it more difficult to sell a book into foreign markets if you are self-published? Do you happen to know the answer to that?
I would expect so. My perception is that whether books move into foreign markets basically has to do with how well the two publishers on either end know one another. So I would expect that self-published authors would have more difficulty. With that being said, I don't know in detail, and it is a little bit mysterious to me about sort of how publishers, say in Poland, find out about particular books in English. They are paying a lot of attention. And I think that if you had a self-published book that was doing really well, that there's every possibility that people might take notice, you know, in the same way that self-published authors sometimes move into mainstream houses. But my expectation is yes, that it would be a little more difficult. Yeah.
Kim also wanted to know if you could put the name of the American Literary Translation Group in the chat at the end.
Oh,
right now.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, we have another question here from Helen. I'll get back to Kim's other question. Helen wanted to know, how does it work when translators know the language but not the culture? I mean, I take it you know the culture because you're Polish, but she also wanted to know, or the history, or to make sure that the translation won't be mistranslated because it's the correct word or phrase, which might mean something different.
Yeah. I mean, this is all part of the job, is that you have to know the history, you have to know the culture, and if it's something that you don't know about, you have to do the research and find out. In Poland, it's quite common for Polish people who are non-native English speakers, who are trained to a sort of university level of English, to be sort of the people of first resort when bringing a Polish text, not maybe a book, but like certainly museum texts, other cultural texts, when bringing these things into English, mainly because they're cheaper to work with because they live in Poland where things are cheaper. And I don't want to generalize. Some of these folks are really, really great at what they do and they all work really hard. But I think often this approach to the work misfires, and it's because of exactly what you're talking about, that if you haven't really spent a long time in the target language country, in the target language culture, really getting to know it in depth and really getting to know the nuances of the language and the culture, you're going to struggle to create a compelling text in the target language. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that the text has to work in the target language, whether that's English or Polish or Spanish or what have you. I would say that if there's someone who's trying to work as a literary translator who doesn't know their target language culture very well, then they need to learn it, or else they're not going to be an effective literary translator.
And if it's not too intrusive, Kim also wanted to know, what's the average cost for you to charge in translating a 70,000 to 80,000 word novel?
That's a great question. The answer is, of course, that it depends. The answer to every question in translation is it depends, of course. I typically charge anywhere between like 12 to 15 cents per word up to around 20 to 22. It depends a lot on the size of the project. It depends a lot on who the client is. There's a lot of variables that can go into that. Sometimes I have a lower fee because I'm getting more royalties. Sometimes I will have the publisher kind of guaranteeing a fee at a certain level, and then we'll get grants that will kind of fill up my fee to a different level. The financing of translation is always very tricky. I'm usually working with small independent publishers who haven't got a lot of money. It's just a very expensive process. That's all that there is to it. And so we're always looking for ways to sort of find savings or to find support. Fortunately, going into English, there are some grants that are available. There are grants in Poland that I apply for. The National Endowment for the Arts of blessed memory used to provide grants for these kinds of things. And there are a couple of other sources. Pan America, for instance, has translation grants. So you're always trying to cobble together money from various sources. Yeah.
I got a message just now asking, Sean, do you have an agent that negotiates these royalty rights, or is this something you have to figure out?
It's something that I do myself. There are a very few literary translators who have agents. The economics of it don't really work, to be honest. Our fees are so low that when you take 10 or 15% out of them, neither you nor the agent is really making any money. So it's really, there's a couple of people at the very, very top of the profession who have agents. You know, Edith Grossman had an agent. Richard Prevere and Larissa Wolahonsky have an agent. I know a few others. I do get legal support from the Authors Guild. They help me to review my contracts. I know translators who have lawyers that they work with specifically for contract review, but no, I had to educate myself about contracts. I had to learn how to negotiate the terms myself. I had to learn how to negotiate the fees myself. It's part of all of the sort of outside labor that goes into this work that isn't just taking words from one book and putting them into English,
And Kim was asking, as an indie author, do they approach you to translate your books for various markets, or is it usually the publisher?
It's both. I often hear from authors asking if I'd be interested in their work. I would say I mainly hear about things from rights agents at publishing houses in Poland. I don't go to Frankfurt, but I go to the London Book Fair, and I'll have meetings with folks, and they'll sort of bring out their catalogs, and they'll say, oh, you might be interested in this, you might be interested in that. And I go home with a whole suitcase full of books, most of which I, of course, never get around to reading. But I try to keep up with the reviews in Poland. I try to keep an eye on what's coming out. But yeah, every now and again, I will get approached directly by an author, and we'll find an interesting project that way. But I would say equally as often it's me writing to authors and saying, hey, I read your book. I really loved it. I'd be interested in doing a sample and sending it around. Would that be okay? And of course, they always say, oh, yes, please,
That's fantastic.
Hmm.
Stephanie, we've gone through most of the questions. Do you want to take over for some other topics that you had in mind?
Okay, here's one. My last question. We're publishing, this is all of us to talk about. Publishing has changed a lot. I was first published in 1993, and oh my goodness, has it changed? And thus the world of translations. How has it changed for each of us? Can we maybe start with the authors?
I have something, yeah, terrifying that I read about, and I mean so much so that I really couldn't finish reading the rest of the article. I read a headline a couple of weeks ago that said that major publishers are starting to experiment with using AI models for foreign translations. I'm sure.
Oh my God, I didn't want to bring that up. I had it in the original. I said, don't go into.
Yeah, and then said that they would just use, they would use actual professional translators that knew the language to just kind of do cleanup when AI went and hallucinated and screwed everything up. But of course, AI is prone to screwing things up and getting it wrong. And Sean's comments on the 3 individual translations of the author's work tonight emphasize just how important the translators getting the individual voice and wordsmithing of each author's English original writing is. And an AI model will, of course, be, a disaster. They would just turn something into a McBook in whatever language and kind of, is the end of the entire profession and model as we know it. So I think this is something that we need to be on top of. It's the same thing we're talking about at the Screen Actors Guild with audiobooks, because we know AI has no soul. So yeah, and AI of course is just going to look at a word and translate it. And how do we know that AI knows THERE from THEY apostrophe RE from THEIR?
There's also no soul. I mean, I did a Facebook ad for a while, and when I was doing the whatever it was online to get it to run, they suggested that they might want to use their AI copy rather than what I had written in my description of the book. It was pretty horrifying. They got the plot of the book. There was no soul, no melody, no rhythm. It was like, what is this? And that's what a writer has. So I don't know how AI is going to. It's I mean, the rhythm, each of the translations were of each of our work. The way Sean expressed the rhythm that the translator caught, it's so beautiful. And language is poetry. I don't know, but I wasn't going to bring up this subject. Yeah,
the way that each one of the translators. We choose our own words so carefully in English, and the way that each one of the foreign translators specifically chose words in a certain order to capture the rhythm and the ethos and the music of our individual writing to convey to their own audiences.
Oh my gosh, I really
split my wrist now and fill it with vodka. I don't know.
Jeanne, do you anything, since we're running towards the end, we've got 5 more minutes. Jeanne, do you have anything to say about how publishing and maybe translation has changed?
I mean, readers have changed, that's for sure. Shorter concentration spans, and I don't know. I'm kind of a pessimist with the way the world, in particular our country, is going right now, and I think that affects what gets published and how published works get received. The AI thing really, really worries me, and I was wondering at first, well, could we do, kind of like they do with genetically modified food, label it as such? Can you label a book computer written? But that's not going to happen. And I'm cynical enough to think that people wouldn't care anyway if it's got a certain plot or something like that. But
I care, you'd care.
We all care. Listen, I think there will always be a group
There will always be a group of discerning readers who care. And, I think I don't know, it's hard to think in large numbers anymore. I think we have to start thinking in terms of more niche audiences and realizing the audience is there. And even though publishers want us to sell 100,000 copies, that's not going to be happening.
It doesn't happen to, it happens to the rarest, smallest number of it's the idea of what they want, of course, but it happens to so few books. Yeah. And Sean, do you have anything to speak to? I wasn't going to mention the word AI as I said,
it's the thing that's on everyone's mind. I mean, I will say that, Jeanne, your idea is a good one about the labeling, and this has been on a lot of people's minds. The Authors Guild now offers a human-authored label, that you can put on the cover of your books. And Alta, the organization I work for, and the American Translators Association, which represents translators of all kinds, are talking about developing something similar for translations. To me, the only way that we can compete with AI is on quality.
Yes.
And so I think that we have to trust that our readers are discerning, that they will look for quality, that they will look for literature that they really respond to. That's why people read in the first place.
Yes.
And I think that, AI is certainly better than in terms of translation, is certainly better than translation software that we've seen in the past, but it can't do what a human can do. And I believe in the power of literature to connect with its readers, and I think as long as we're able to do that, I really hope that people will come and find us. But it's up to readers. We don't have to have a world where all of the books are being churned out by some algorithm. If readers don't buy them, then publishers won't publish them. That's the short version,
And we need to push for that labeling, I think.
Yeah,
I think that would be important.
And conversely, the warning label, like the warning label on cigarettes that's poison, the warning label, this is soulless AI with,
this computer-generated dreck is detrimental to your health.
It's in my book contracts, the last book contract. I have to testify that none of my book is written by AI. Considering I don't let anybody change one noun in my book without my permission, and then I change it for them. I'm not likely to let AI go and write my book, but I guess they have to put that in now. It's really.
I have a clause in my latest contract that says that I'm not allowed to translate using AI. And what's interesting is that the writer is a science fiction author, and I would have thought that he would be all in favor. But I guess not.
Well, at the end of the narration, when I narrate audiobooks, it says, this blah, 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 blah has been narrated by Leslie Carroll, a member of SAG-AFTRA. And I'm sure that Susan and your husband, you do the same thing, that there's that disclaimer. Like, this has been narrated by a union actor. We're trained to do this. Yes, I'm a trained professional, ma'am.
Yes, it's the arts and crafts movement. And on that note, we're going to end. Thank you for such a fabulous panel.
That concludes our program. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. You can find out more about the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society at our website, or contact us at info@hns-nyc.org. And finally, please consider supporting our volunteer panelists and hosts. You can contact them at their websites in the description. Thanks for joining us.